And good evening to everyone. Just in case anybody's distracted and happens to notice I have two black eyes, I should explain it. I was telling an old NDP union organizer how much I like this book. So, fortunately, there's only 3 of them. There are real difficulties introducing someone who really does not need an introduction. And a couple of years ago during the Liberal leadership, I was attending a very early morning breakfast speech of Mr. Ray's. And the person introducing him went through his voluminous CV, starting right with the little rays of sunshine, and through his many accomplishments, Rhodes Scholarship, his days, of course, in politics, his writings, and it went on quite a long time. We don't have time for all of that tonight, but during this, Arlene Perley was sitting across the table, Bob's long-suffering wife, and I leaned over and said, "Is there anything he isn't good at?" And she informed me that a couple of years ago when he was premier, or a number of years ago when he was premier, they were making a documentary about him, and they asked his daughters if there was a single word that best described what their father was not. And the word was handy. So I really don't think there's much point in telling you much more about this man. I mean, he has a remarkable career, but he's not handy. You're not going to see him at Home Depot. So, if you will, welcome Bob Ray.
Set this up very well. Obviously, the timing of your book and the events in the Middle East, tumultuous as they are, there's a remarkable coincidence. And you begin your book by looking at the marvelous debate between Edmund Burke, the careful conservative, and Thomas Paine, the passionate Democrat. To what extent do you feel that the things you explore in the book and the things that are happening in the Middle East share some of those parallels of that now quite old debate, but with those current events?
Well, I think a lot. I mean, I think what I try to argue in the book is really that, first of all, there are no easy answers, and secondly, that we have a profound aspiration in the world for increasingly around the world for something people call democracy. And at the same time, we have, I think, a deep concern that this idea not be turned into an excuse for intervention or for somebody invading somebody else, and that there's a real interest in every culture in stability. And as I see the debate unfolding on television every night, we're all transfixed watching the events in Cairo and Alexandria and elsewhere. It seems to me that the debate is in part, and it's even more complicated because of all the other ideas, but it's in good part about this powerful desire for change, for democracy, for governments that are accountable, for people being able to express themselves, for a whole bunch of ideas with which everybody identifies and gets very excited. And at the same time, there's a real concern about stability. I mean, we've seen a lot of revolutions go askew, go wrong. And so none of us, it seems to me that at this point in our lives, we should all go into every situation with our eyes wide open. It's not like the first time we've all fallen in love or something. I mean, we've all seen this before. And so with wanting to denigrate or downgrade or diminish the aspirations of the Egyptian people, I think people need to kind of take a step back and say, well, what do we think is going to happen? How do we think this is going to unfold? How do we think that human rights are really going to be protected? And what is the role of other countries and other issues? And plus, as in the French Revolution or as in the Russian Revolution, or lots of revolutions, there are all kinds of movements and people who have all kinds of ideas that don't necessarily have anything to do with democracy. I mean, the Jacobins were not interested in democracy. Robespierre was not interested in democracy. Lenin was not interested in democracy. And so we have to be wary of those people who take advantage of powerful public aspirations or popular aspirations and then turn and twist them and say, okay, now now we're in charge. And we just have to be wary of all of that unfolds. And so I guess I'm immodest enough to think that the book may help people to understand a little bit about where these things fit in terms of the way we've been through a lot of these debates before, we've been through a lot of these revolutions before, and we have to be smart about how they turn out.
We also, though, have quite a long history of being tolerant I think, for the reasons you've just laid out, a concern for stability, broader foreign policy concerns, but a willingness to support leaders, including Mr. Mubarak in Egypt, who are anything but Democrats. So what is our credibility in a region like the Middle East? And when I say we, I'm thinking beyond Canada, but including Canada, sort of the Western nations. When we preach democracy, but we're willing to tolerate quite authoritarian regimes.
But we don't have a lot. I mean, I think that's one of the central problems we face. I mean, and this goes back a long way. If you look at, Jimmy Carter pointed this out in the mid-70s when he came to the presidency, and he pointed out that the Americans had supported Pinochet and they'd supported a lot of bad guys in Latin America, and so human rights sort of came to the fore. And then, of course, he got caught in the Iran problem and was defeated by Reagan. And we can sort of see from that time onwards a real problem for us. I mean, not just for the Americans, but for us as Canadians too, because it's for the West. The famous description, most famous description, was by Franklin Roosevelt, who, when somebody asked him about Batista, who you may remember, because you and I are old enough to remember, was the president of Cuba before Castro. Right. And somebody said, well, you
could still buy the cigars.
Yeah, I mean, you can still buy the cigars in the United States. We can still buy them here.
Yeah,
and somebody said, well, Batista is a real son of a bitch. And Roosevelt is reported to have said, yeah, he's a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. And that's something we have to be very wary of, because I think we have to understand the impact that we have, the impact that it has when the perception is that we're supporting really bad guys. And for the most part, I say to the audience, it is guys. Though Margaret Thatcher would probably qualify. Certainly in my book. Certainly in my book was a bad guy.
Let me just pick up on that, because I mean it's very not on the Margaret Thatcher. I think we'll let Margaret Thatcher
she can defend herself.
Yes, yeah, and she wouldn't be here to handbag us anyway. It'd be but in terms of supporting the bad guys, we also have trouble when democracy plays out, and you deal with this in the book, when you look at the situation in Gaza and the PLO and Hamas, where governments decided after one of the first free and fair elections in that part of certainly in Gaza, and certainly in the Palestinian administrative area, that the world decided it could not tolerate a freely and fairly elected government in Hamas, even though they won that, or the PLO lost that election for many of the reasons why a government would lose an election here. We couldn't bring ourselves to support Hamas. I mean, can we pick and choose when people make a democratic